Right then, the whine you heard was a failed starter clutch. Now, that brings up the question whether the Virago starters are shit or what, because we've heard the rumors that Viragos have awful starting systems, and there's a grain of truth to that. The first generation, 81 to 83, 750s and 920s, and the 84 to 85 XV700s had the first generation entirely mechanical starter systems, meaning that the starter's engagement and disengaging gears and whatnot only relied on spring forces and the starter motor's condition and the teeth. It was totally mechanical. What you had in there was essentially a spline shaft with spiral grooves on it, and there was an idler gear going back and forth on that, depending on how it's turned and how fast. The idler gear also had a spring clip on it, which applied braking force, so it tried to slow it down. Meaning, when the starter motor started spinning and that splined spiral shaft started turning, the spring clip that tried to hold on to the gear translated some of the spinning or rotational force into lateral force, and that meant that the gear had to fling out, and it meshed together with the flywheel, obviously turned the engine over, and once the engine started running, the speed of the rotational velocity of the flywheel was faster than the starter's velocity, so it kicked the idler gear back on that spiral track, because obviously the forces changed direction, so the idler gear was flinged back inside towards the engine, out of engagement, and then of course you let go of the button, job done. Now the thing is that this system relies on three key points. One is the condition of the starter, the second the condition of the clip, and the third the condition of the teeth. Now, when it's all new out of the factory, fresh battery, clean starter, good teeth and whatnot, the mechanical belay is perfectly fine, everything happens when it's supposed to happen, and everything slips in and out when it's supposed to. Now, as things age, as the starter motor starts spinning a bit slower because the battery is wearing out, or the carbon brushes in the starter start, or the carbon dust starts filling up the starter motor's back end, or the spring loses its pinching force because of the heat cycles, shit starts to happen. Namely, the idler gear that flings out and meshes with the flywheel is going to fling out a bit too slowly. It is going to spin a bit faster, so the forces or the balance of the forces will be different, so it is going to spin quicker, but the lateral force will be weaker, and of course that means that there will be quite a bit of difference in rotational speed between the stationary flywheel and the rotating idler gear, and that means the gear teeth are going to crash. And once that starts happening, things will go pretty bad pretty fast, and the teeth will lose their knife-edged profile, which was there from the get-go in order to make the engagement more efficient and smooth, but the teeth will round each other off, the gears will bounce off of each other because the rotational speed will be quite different, and so on and so on. Now, as you can see, there's if only one of these three things is off kilter, the whole system goes south, and something will shit the bed, usually the teeth, and of course that is quite difficult and not difficult but quite expensive to replace. So in this case, the first generation starter system is, yeah, if it has a reputation for being shit, that's, what's the word, well deserved. In this case, it isn't, because in my experience, the second generation Virago engines, or the starter system on these, is pretty much average in reliability. Most Japanese cruiser bikes, Vulcans, Intruders, whatnot, they all have starter clutch failures, and every now and then. And this is no exception. This is absolutely average in its class. So it's not worse or not better than most of its contemporaries or the similar bikes in its league. There are better ones like the Honda Shadow series. Those have overbuilt starter clutches, and there are worse ones like the XV535, which well, I just don't want to talk about it, and the Dragstar or V-Star 1100, which again has a very flimsy and fragile starter clutch. In comparison, this is not bad at all. Now, like I said, it has a starter clutch, and this is an updated system, which means it's electromechanical. When you press the button, essentially this thing here is a solenoid, and it has a moving actuator, which is a little shaft, shall we say, with a hook in the end, and that hook moves and tilts a lever like so. It's like a little seesaw, and when you press the button, the lever tilts like so. This end goes in, this end flings out. And when this end flings out, that is going to pull a fork behind this cover, and that pulls the gear into engagement with the flywheel. So the idler is not the idler does not rely on rotating stuff, you know, rotational inertia, spring forces and whatnot. It is directly pushed into engagement with the flywheel. Now the other thing this thing does, or the other job it has, is when the actuator goes all the way back, it shorts two contacts, and that energizes the starter motor, meaning that the mechanical connection between the gears is already established by the time the starter starts spinning. That means it is a better and upgraded, much more of an upgraded. Let's try again. Much of an upgraded design. Now, with this one, there is a slight chance that you keep pushing the button and the gear is still pulled into engagement when the engine kicks in and it starts firing and starts spinning. And that is why there has to be a one-way drive device, a freewheel device, which is our starter clutch. That lets the starter drive the flywheel, but not the other way around. Basically, the starter clutch is a special sort of bearing which has an outer race and an inner race, and it locks up in one direction but spins freely in the other direction. And that's what we have here, and that's what we need to replace, because the fucker does not lock up in the direction it's supposed to lock up, because it spins freely in the direction where it's supposed to lock up. That's pretty much the gist of it. Otherwise, it is a more reliable and a well thought out system, very similar to cars, starter motors on cars, where you have an external solenoid and a Bendix that pulls the gears into engagement. In that regard, it is very similar to cars, and it is easy to understand once you're willing to put some time and some research into it. Do not like, do not subscribe, but if you feel like you need to know more about your starters, by all means come back and I'll show you what's inside. Cheers.